When lies lead to disaster. Hello everyone, I'm Jason, and I'm here to review the 2019 miniseries Chernobyl, produced by HBO for you. A splendid show that could have been more realistic. This series is definitely one of the best series you can watch in your lifetime. If you don't trust me, look at the high ratings of this work. This work has received a score of 9.5 on the IMDb site, and 95 of its users have liked it, which are very high numbers. So I think it's worth watching, and in this video, we're going to discuss this issue. We will have a short introduction without spoilers from the series review. If you have watched this series and know its story, you can skip this part of the video timeline. Let's first see the story of this series. Chernobyl is based on the historical event of the explosion of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant reactor in 1986, which resulted in the death of thousands of people. But don't be mistaken, this is not a documentary about a nuclear power plant. On the contrary, this miniseries has tried to show other aspects of this disaster. The story begins after a brief introduction from the Chernobyl nuclear power plant located in Ukraine in the Soviet Union when reactor number 4 of this power plant has an accident and leads to an explosion and destruction of part of the power plant. And from this time on, officials, by denying facts and insisting that everything is under control, caused the start of a disaster. Chernobyl is a narrative that reflects the Soviet Union's view of this incident, although a narrative that is not entirely correct and has flaws that we will get to later. The series has tried to explain all events simply and concisely so that the audience does not get confused, although this simplification has caused some flaws in the work. In general, this series has tried to highlight the decisions of Soviet officials in causing this disaster and has caused us to present a black and white image. The last thing you need to know before watching this series is the dark and cold atmosphere of this series, which may not be liked by everyone. Also, in some parts, we see painful and upsetting scenes from people who were in atomic radiation, which if you are not interested in seeing such scenes, I do not recommend this series to you. Well, now that I have introduced this series to you, it's time to go for a review of the series. If you haven't watched this series yet, I suggest you don't watch this part of the video because it contains spoilers from the series. Well, let's first have a detailed review of this series, and then answer questions that have preoccupied many viewers' minds. The first thing we notice when watching Chernobyl is the writer's view about Chernobyl disaster. We hear talk about truths and lies being true or false.
When the truth offends, we lie and lie until we can no longer remember it is even there, but it is still there. Every lie we tell incurs a debt to the truth. Sooner or later, that debt is paid.
Especially at the beginning and end of the series about Soviet Union's cover-up on this incident. Although writer Craig Mazin has been a bit excessive in this part, and it has resulted in an unrealistic portrayal of Soviet government as dark. We are waiting for a hero in the series until episode 2. Someone who comes and cleans up these messes, someone who deals with knowledge with this issue and not with prejudices. If there is one thing we have learned from watching Chernobyl, it is that when some fools mess up, there are others who fix their mess with self-sacrifice. As we go further, we still see more foolishness from Soviet officials, and finally in episode 2, our hero enters, who is supposed to pull Soviet officials out of their delusions. In my opinion, one of the best scenes of the series is just this scene between Valery Legasov and Mikhail Gorbachev, when Legasov tries very simply to make him understand what danger they are facing. In this scene, it has been tried to simplify so that all the audience and people present in the scene can understand the depth of the disaster. Later, Legasov tries to explain the work of the nuclear reactor in the helicopter, where the director has tried to explain this process to the audience by simplifying it. A funny and interesting thing in this scene is when Shershabina tells Legasov that if he does not explain the work of the nuclear reactor to him, he will throw him down from the helicopter. Here, the writer has tried to add comedy to the series to get the series out of the serious atmosphere it is in so that the audience does not get tired. Of course, this is not an ordinary comedy. This is one of the places where the writer has gone too far. Here, the writer explicitly says that Soviet Union officials are nothing but a bunch of incompetent fools and thugs, and, well, this is what makes the series unrealistic and contradicts reality. In reality, Soviet Union officials made mistakes that we will get to later, but the picture shown of them in this series is different from the real picture. Of course, I'm not a Communist Party supporter, and you don't need to call me Comrade Jason. But this contradiction with truth is exactly the opposite of what the series wants to tell us. And this is a big contradiction. The most important message that the series tries to give us is truth. The series constantly tries to remind us of the value of accepting evidence and facts, even when they are not in our favor. and with various dialogues in different scenes. It reminds us so much of this issue and its effects that after watching the series you want to swear that you will never lie in your life again. Accepting truth and seeing realities is what it is, but the writer himself has ignored many facts in making the series, and this has made his words worthless and slogan-like. Although the series itself has been able to convey its message very well to the audience, you are completely influenced by watching it, but then when you search about Chernobyl disaster, you see that this series was not so truthful. Well, let's go back to the series. When our hero arrives at the power plant by helicopter and sees the depth of disaster, and then again local officials insist that everything here is under control. From here, our hero tries to fix this mess. In this part, we see that Legasov does his best to prevent a great disaster. The background music and narrative style make us worry that a new problem is on its way, so that after solving each problem, a worse problem appears. Yulana Kooks, who is another nuclear scientist, comes to help our hero and tries to help him in his work. It may be interesting for you that this character does not exist in reality and is a creation of writer's mind, and this is one of those things that causes this series to deviate from truth. After that, we see a scene where Legasov and Chernobyl want to voluntarily select 3 people from among power plant employees. Well, again here, the series tries to show us again here about impact of truth and lies. This is when Legasov first tries to convince them with lies to go inside power plant and drain pumps, and employees are not convinced at all. Then Shabina enters, and by telling truth and creating a sense of sacrifice causes 3 employees volunteer spontaneously. Here we see again victory of truth over lies and cover-ups. And well, maybe I should tell you truth too, that in reality these 3 were employees and they were ordered to do this job. They were forced into doing this job. Then we see Yulana collecting information from people who were present at power plant on night of accident. And will we face one of the most heartbreaking scenes you might see in cinema when they show fate of people who were exposed to radiation. In the next part, we see Legasov's efforts to clear the roof of the power plant from graphite, where we face one of the most interesting scenes of the series when the Soviet Union gets a robot from Germany to remove graphites from the roof. But the tolerance level of radiation that they had told them this robot should have was much less than the actual amount of radiation, and well, again, we get to this issue of escaping from truth. The writer wanted to tell us that the Soviet Union was so immersed in optimistic and false news that they believed their own false news. The writer wanted to tell us that when you constantly tell yourself a lie, you believe that lie is true. In the next part, again, the writer talks about the value of truth for us when Legasov explains the flaws of Soviet nuclear power plants in court. And here is where we see that dialogue that I showed you at the beginning of the video. In general, the writer tried to tell us in the series what disasters lies can bring, the message that has been able to convey well to us. Now that we had a review on this series, let's go to questions that have preoccupied viewers' minds after watching this series. The first question I'm sure has been created in many of you is whether Legasov really committed suicide, or KGB killed him and staged it as if he had committed suicide. Well, as we saw in episode 1 of the series, Legasov's suicide and hanging, and according to reports, Legasov committed suicide exactly 2 years after Chernobyl disaster. His recorded voice was later used to reveal Chernobyl events. The next important question is whether evacuation of Pripyat city really took place so late. Well, I have to say yes. Unfortunately, evacuation of city took place 36 hours after explosion, and well, it was not clear if rest of world would not have been aware of this incident when this evacuation would take place. Interestingly, when buses came for evacuation, city residents thought they would be away from city for only a few days. Even a message was given to city residents to keep their calm, and this is a short-term evacuation. We will both die in 5 years. Is this dialogue that Legasov says true? Well, about fate of Legasov, you know, and interestingly, Shcherbina died 4 years after disaster, which can be said that Legasov's word was correct. The next question that anyone might ask is how real is story of Yamila Ignatenko? Well, I have to say story of her, and her love for her husband is real, but there are differences with reality and narrative of story. The first one is that in series when nurse asks her if she is pregnant, she says she is not pregnant, but in reality, she told nurse she was pregnant and had 2 children. And in other sequences, we see that she hugs her husband, but in reality, doctors did not allow them to get close to each other at all. And last question, for viewers of Chernobyl series, is how many people were killed in Chernobyl disaster? According to official reports from Soviet Union at time, 2 workers were killed as a result of power plant explosion, and 28 engineers and firefighters died due to radiation in following week. And according to unofficial reports, out of 500,000 people who fought in Chernobyl disaster, 20,000 people died. and 200,000 people were officially retired. And well, now that we have answered your questions about this incident, it's time to have a general conclusion from Chernobyl series, so stay with me. In general, I have to say Chernobyl series with all its flaws is one of the best series you can watch. And although it may not be attractive for everyone, also writer has tried in it to talk about valuable concept being truth and disasters lies can bring. Although series deviates from truth, but director has tried to make it look like a documentary so it's more believable for audience. I'm Jason and this is Times Screen channel page. I'll be happy if you liked this video, join our small family. Also, you can tell us how our next videos should be related and how.